Just stopping by to share another video lesson with you guys online. I want to start off just by reviewing yesterday's FRQ. I know that a lot of the students are doing well and other students are getting better at these FRQs. So the more that we practice, the better that you will get. Just understand that. I know that some students are like, hey, another FRQ, sir, come on. But really, that's what we need to perform right. That's what we need to work on to do well on our AP test, because that's exactly what we will be tested on. Being that the test is now open note, you will have the ability to kind of have access to definitions, right? But you need to practice the skill, because the skill is what you're being tested on. So we need to define what that term is. We need to explain how it relates to the scenario given, and then we'll be well off and successful. Let's start off here. It says, the question, it's about professors, rats, variables, assignment groups, and ethics. So it says, Professor Panapa has been attempting to replicate the famous Rosenweek rat study over the past 3 months. He has been studying the brains of rats that have been randomly selected from a large population and then placed into either a control or experimental condition. In the control condition, the rats maintain their typical daily activities and living environment. In the first experimental condition, the rats were exposed to an enriched environment with many toys, plenty of food, and other rats with whom they would interact. In the second experimental condition, the rats were placed in a deprived environment with no toys or other rats, but were fed each day. After 10 weeks of living in these conditions, Professor Panapa examined the cerebral cortex of the rats in each condition. He found that the rats in the deprived condition had fewer neural networks and less mass than the rats in the controlled condition, while the rats in the enriched condition had a thicker cerebral cortex and more neural networks. So here comes the question. Part A. Define and identify the following components of this study. Independent variable. So we need to know what that is. Remember, independent variable is what I manipulate. Operational definition of the dependent variable. Remember, operational definitions are just simply the process, the steps that they took to put this experiment together. A null hypothesis and a potential confounding variable. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. I know that some students have already submitted this, but for those students that have trouble understanding how to deliver an FRQ response, this is how you do it. You just define the term. So the independent variable is the component of an experiment that is manipulated by the researcher. Professor Panapa is the controlling the environment of the rats to determine if they live in the same conditions as before or in a deprived or enriched environment. When we talk about the operational definition of the dependent variable is a clear and objective statement regarding how the outcome of the study will be measured. In this study, Professor Panapa is measuring the number of neural networks and the size of the cerebral cortex of the rats after 10 weeks of living in different conditions. So here, the operational definition would be my last sentence here. Professor Panapa is measuring the number of neural networks and the size of cerebral cortex of the rats after 10 weeks of living in different conditions. So you just literally say what they did and how they did it. You just restate that within the operational definition. Now, for the null hypothesis is literally just a statement which indicates that the independent variable will have no impact on the dependent variable. In this case, the null hypothesis would state that living conditions, which are enriched versus deprived, will have no impact on the thickness of the cerebral cortex or strength of neural networks. So remember, the null hypothesis is a statement that indicates that the independent variable will have no impact on the dependent variable. So now when we talk about the confounding variables are just variables that we haven't taken into consideration. So confounding variables are those variables that are not controlled by the experimenter, but that may interfere with the outcome of the study. If Professor Panapa did not take into account the thickness of the rat cerebral cortex prior to the start of the study, this may serve, as a confounding variable because he may attribute the thickness to living conditions, but it may be influenced by prior experiences. So remember, confounding variables are just variables that we don't take into account that could affect the study. Now, when we talk about part B, let's go back to part B. In part B, they want us to answer these two questions. How can Professor Panapa achieve random assignment in this study, and how could Professor Panapa find out if the study made a significant difference between the groups? Well, we must determine what happened in the study, right? But here, they don't really necessarily want us to talk exactly what happened, but they just want us to define and to explain how these terms relate to the scenario that they gave us over here. So let's go ahead and dive into it. In part B, we can just keep it very simple. Random assignment involves the equal chance that subjects will be placed into the different conditions in the study. So in this case, Professor Panapa should provide each rat selected for the study with a number and then place all of the numbers in a computer which will arbitrarily place each rat into either the control, enriched, or deprived condition. Remember, the random assignment is just assigning randomly, and so that we're fair and we're not being biased on who gets what side of the experiment. So now, statistical significance indicates that the result of the different conditions are not due to chance, but rather are due to the manipulation of the independent variable. So if Professor Panapa had a p-score of less than or equal to 0.05, he could reject his null hypothesis and accept his alternative hypothesis. This would indicate that the type of environment in which a rat is held has an impact on the size of the cerebral cortex. So for statistical significance, remember, once you do compose the study and it is significant what you're looking at, it needs to be at least 0.05, either negative or positive, in order for you to determine that it's statistically significant. Once you do notice that it's statistically significant, you can actually overwrite the null hypothesis because you know that that is not true and that your alternate hypothesis is true, which is that having an enriched environment where a lot of interactions are happening and great experiences leads to better, greater neural connections when compared to the rats that were not in that kind of enriched environment. They didn't have all that many neural connections. So all you have to speak about is how after the finding, right, or after the experiment, they did find that the enriched environment was pretty helpful for neural connections. And when we talk about part C, right, in part C, they just want us to identify a potential ethical concern that may be associated with Professor Panapa's study. Ethical concerns are things that should not happen that way, things that we as professionals should take into consideration. So for this example, you could say something like the ethical guidelines involved with animal research include the respectful treatment of animals. One must consider that if the potential risks to the animals are more extreme than the information gained from the research, Professor Panapa might consider whether it is ethical to leave the rats in the deprived environment for a long period of time if his results demonstrate that the cerebral cortices of these rats are less complex than those in the enriched environment. There may be a question to whether the deprived rats will be damaged for life. In other words, maybe when thinking about this experiment, right, the rats that were involved in the deprived environment could be a concern, or how long we leave them in that kind of environment could be a concern because after or at the end of the day, there are still mammals that have feelings and they do have emotions. So if we leave them in those kinds of environments and the gain of information is not that great, then we shouldn't leave them in those conditions for too long. And that's all this part C is about. So ladies and gentlemen, do not overthink it whenever you're working on these FRQ prompts. Just simply keep it very simple. Go back if you didn't know what the term was. Right now, what we're working on is really fixing the skill of writing these FRQs so that way you can have a great chance to passing the AP exam. When it comes to the definitions, go ahead and study the PowerPoints that I have uploaded, as well as the key terms, so that way you're more familiar where these terms are located and what chapters they belong to, so that way it's easy for you to access this information later on. Also, keep in mind that you simply need to define and explain. Do not go on and on and on. Just keep it very simple and technical. Thank you very much for stopping by today. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, concerns, ideas, anything like that, please let me know. Please comment when I post this video and let me know how it's going. And also, if you need to get on a call with me, also let me know. We're here to help. Thank you very much for stopping and have a great day, guys.